streaming on YouTube. Hi everybody, my name is Khaled Saffuri. I'm the president of National Press Foundation. I'd like to welcome you. This is our first event at this office. Our office, for you who attended our old events, were just a block away on 1800 K Street. We moved to Virginia, so now when we do something, we do it at the National Press Club or here. We couldn't find the date available at the National Press Club, so we decided to do it here. I'd like to welcome you all, and today we'll be talking about a very important topic that many people don't realize how important it is, because Tunisia is the birthplace of the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring started 13 years ago in Tunis and inspired the whole region, from Egypt to Libya, Kuwait, Syria, in the area, Morocco, other countries. And I don't believe Middle East have recovered yet, and I don't think the Arab Spring is over yet. I think counter-revolutionaries, countries with lots of money, Arab countries with lots of money, worked very hard to undermine the accomplishment of the people in these countries that decided to elect their president for the first time, from Egypt to Libya, Tunis, and even Syria. They had to face conspiracy by mostly Gulf countries and a country like that, a cool country of Egypt, played a role in causing trouble in Tunis and in Libya as well. Anyway, I will leave the experts to discuss this, to talk about this. Today we have distinguished speakers who will be with us, and they will give us, each will speak, it was originally 6 minutes, so we want to make it 10. 10. Each will speak for 10 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A after that. I will first introduce His Excellency Ambassador Gordon Gray. He's former ambassador to Tunis. Please.
Great. Well, thanks to all of you for coming, and all of you online as well. And before I try and answer the very important question that you posed, I want to thank you for convening this group, because I think it is an important question that needs to be addressed. And I'll answer the question right off the bat, saying I don't think there's going to be a return to democracy, unfortunately, because I don't think there's going to be a democratic election in Tunisia. And let me give a little bit of background to, from my experience there, to explain my reasoning. I arrived in Tunisia just about this time 15 years ago, mid-September, so 6 weeks before the October 25th quote-unquote election. It turned out to be Ben Ali's last election. The regime, the Ben Ali regime very tightly restricted the number of candidates who were going to run. The media was completely censored, and so the election was anything but free and fair, of course. The only NGO, if you will, or if you want to call the African Union an NGO, the only organization, external organization, that was allowed to observe the elections, at least as far as I was aware of, was the African Union, which at least at the time was not exactly a bastion of democracy promotion, and they very obediently declared that the election was free and fair. According to the government figures, Ben Ali won 89% of the vote. I was kind of amused by that, in the sense that in the 2004 elections, he won in the 1999 election, he won 99% of the vote. And I guess someone got the courage up to say, oh, that looks a little cooked. So in 2004, they dialed it back 5 points to, he only got 94%. And then in 2009, he got 89%. And, you know, slight snarkiness aside, I think the 89% figure was probably pretty credible, because why would you go out and vote, in an election where you knew your vote wasn't going to matter unless you were a party faithful or something like that. I may be in a minority of the people who thought that he got 89% of the vote, but that's my perspective. What I found very unlikely, though, was a similarly inflated participation rate. They tried to put out that there were that about 89% of the people voted. We had a pretty robust election observation mission at the embassy. I went out myself, and it was a beautiful Sunday when the elections were held, and I sure didn't see a lot of people at the polls, and I doubt that they were there. If you fast forward, though, to a more positive development in 2011, there was very much a free and fair election. And one of the things that struck me about the revolution was the day after Ben Ali fled. He fled Friday around 6 p.m. Tunis time. The next morning on television, the prime minister, the holdover prime minister, technocrat, Mohamed Ghannouchi, he announced that Tunisia was going to have free and fair elections with the presence of international observers, because they wanted to make sure they were good elections. And if you go to 9 months later to October 23rd, when the elections actually were held, they were widely viewed as free and fair and credible elections. There were a number of U.S. election observers who came. Rosalind Carter came. Former governor of Minnesota, Tim Pawlenty, came. Other luminaries like that. More importantly, in my opinion, there were thousands of Tunisian observers. And the turnout, as I recall, was close to 60%. It was roughly the same that we saw in the U.S. presidential election. Now, just as an aside, I'd rather see both those figures closer to 90 or 100%. But it was a widely there was wide participation. And as a result, there was the elections had legitimacy. There was a wide acceptance of the results. Now, I was not in Tunisia. I had finished my tour in 2012, so I wasn't there in 2014 or 2019. But by all accounts, those were free and fair elections as well. That brings us to this year's elections, the 2024 elections, and it's just hard to believe how anyone could expect them to be free and fair. One of the accomplishments, in my opinion, of the revolution or the transition period in 2011 was the creation of the Independent Electoral Authority, known by its French acronym as ISIE. And the key word there, from my perspective, and I would say probably from the perspective of the average Tunisian citizen, if I may speak for them, was independent. It truly was independent. Unfortunately, I'm using the past tense. It was independent. Since then, since Kais Saied's power grab, he has taken it over. He has appointed all the members. He restructured it in April 2022. And so now, notwithstanding administrative court orders to the contrary, it is excluding candidates. And I'm not a lawyer, don't pretend to be, but my understanding is that the Tunisian Administrative Court has the authority to make that determination, and ISIE is disregarding it. And these tactics are very familiar to what we saw in 2009 when the rules were conveniently cooked so that Ben Ali would only have, pretty lame opposition. Another similarity between 2024 and 2009 is how Said has muzzled the media, just the same way that Ben Ali has said. And it's hard for me to believe, just as I didn't think many people would have an incentive in 2009 to go out and vote. Why would they go out and vote this year? And I think that's not just a intuitive guess on my part. If you look at the turnout rate for the constitutional referendum, if you look at the turnout rate for the local elections, they were both, really low. So we'll see, but I just don't see. So looking ahead, the key question, or a key question is how will the United States react? How will the Europeans react? I'm going to be pretty surprised if there's much reaction whatsoever. There wasn't, in my opinion, very significant reaction to Said's power grab. And so I just don't see now, with the war in Ukraine, with the war in Gaza, heaven forbid, possibly a war between Hezbollah and Israel, I just don't see that there's going to be much of a US reaction or a European reaction. And I don't think that the European Union writ large has much interest in criticizing Said, because they're trying to work with him to put an end to migration across the Mediterranean. So I'll sum up by apologizing for not being more optimistic. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope Sharan and Radwan tell me why I'm wrong, and I'll gladly take that. But I'm not going to be able to give a very upbeat assessment, unfortunately.
Thank you, Ambassador. Our next speaker, Sharan Grewal.
Great. Well, thank you, Khaled, and thanks everyone for coming. I was asked to speak a bit about the military and what role they might play in these elections. And then,
Sharan, can you speak up, because we have people in the webinar, live streaming also.
So I'll speak a bit about the military and what role they play in and might play in these elections, and then subsequently about the opposition parties and how they're strategizing for these elections. So first, on the military, I think they will play the role that they have played in every election since 2011. That is, guarding the ballot boxes and ensuring that the votes are not tampered with. That is a role that they view with pride as part of their professional mission, is ensuring the ballot boxes are safe. And that's the role that they have continued to play even post July 25th. When we think about the referendum on the Constitution in 2011 or the parliamentary elections in 2022 and the parliamentary elections in 2022, neither of those were free and fair. The environment was not free and fair. Opposition parties were harassed, imprisoned, freedom of speech was restricted. But the votes themselves, I think, were counted honestly, in part because the military was there guarding the ballot boxes. And as a result, the turnout figures that you saw in those 2022 referendum and elections were embarrassingly low, 30% in the referendum and 11% in the parliamentary elections. And that to me suggests that the votes indeed were counted honestly. If they had been inflated, I think it would have been much more than 11% turnout. And that, I think, is the role that the military will play once again in these upcoming elections, ensuring the votes are counted honestly, playing that neutral, apolitical role of just ensuring the votes are honest. I don't think the military would play any role beyond that, nor do I think they should play any role beyond that. I don't think the military will criticize the EZ for how they've conducted these elections. I don't think the military would come out and criticize the president. And I don't think we would want them to either. I think that would contribute to their politicization, that would have dangerous effects long term. And I don't think they would do that either, partly because of their professionalism. They feel a duty to obey the commander-in-chief. They feel that professional duty that would lead them not to publicly criticize or defect from the president in any way. And this particular commander-in-chief is one that has been enhancing the military's interests in terms of giving them autonomy, in terms of promoting the top generals to levels they hadn't seen before, in terms of giving the military more political influence than they have had before, even with the latest cabinet reshuffle where they no longer have the Minister of Agriculture position. Still, I think the military would calculate that it has gained much more under Kais Saied than it did under democracy, and that it might therefore under a return to democracy. And at the end of the day, retired officers throughout the last 10 years were telling me that they felt the parties were corrupt. They kind of bought into Kais Saied's rhetoric, the populist rhetoric, that the parties were the problem. And so as a result, for all those reasons, I don't think the military would defect in any way, would criticize the conduct of these elections. And I think they will stick to their role, which is just to ensure that the ballots are counted honestly and are not tampered with. So then that leads to the opposition. What should they do in these upcoming elections? And I think in the last couple of months, you've seen them debate about whether we should boycott once again, like they did in the constitutional referendum and the parliamentary elections, or if they should participate finally in these elections. And I've tried over the last year to do a bit of research historically and globally into how other oppositions have been navigating this struggle. And I'm not going to bore you with the data and the slides, but what I was finding was that boycotts in the past made sense. When there was little information about the election, when you're not sure if it's going to be free and fair, then if the opposition boycotts, it's informative. It sends you a signal that, yes, maybe this election was not free and fair when the opposition boycotts. And so in the past, you did see some successful boycotts. And I think Bangladesh in the late 80s might be a good example, where the opposition boycotted in 86, boycotted in 88, and that helped to delegitimize the regime and trigger a mass uprising in 1990 that led to democratization. But more recently, post-1990s, it's actually flipped, where boycotts no longer seem to be effective and participating is the better strategy for triggering democratization. And I think the reason is because today we have a lot more information about elections and whether they are free and fair. In Tunisia today, we already know from Amnesty International, from Human Rights Watch, that these arrests are happening, that the opposition is being cracked down upon. We already know, even from Tunisian media, that is covering the disqualifications of candidates and the easy ignoring the administrative court's ruling. The information is already out there about how unfree these elections are going to be and how the environment is unfree heading into the elections, that the opposition boycotting isn't going to add much additional information about the legitimacy of the election. Tunisians are already exposed to it, and if they haven't made up their mind as a result of the arrests and the disqualifications, then the opposition boycotting isn't going to switch them any further in terms of the legitimacy of these elections. And that's also something I was finding in a survey I did right after the constitutional referendum, where I asked Tunisians about whether they thought the referendum was legitimate. And I reminded half of them that the opposition boycotted the referendum. And it made a slight difference. The percent of Tunisians who said the referendum was legitimate fell from 65 to 57%. But at the end of the day, the majority of Tunisians, even when they heard about the boycott, still said this referendum was legitimate. So I don't think that a boycott today would provide any new information for Tunisians that would lead them to think these elections are indeed not free and fair. And so, given that the gains from a boycott are pretty low, the gains from participating, I think, is the better strategy. The gains there are that you reveal the opposition's strength. Right now, the question is not so much, are these elections going to be free and fair? The question is more so, if they were free and fair, would Kais Saied still win? Or would the opposition win in a free and fair election? And a boycott doesn't really help you answer that question, because when you boycott, you could be 2 votes, you could be 2 million votes. We don't know the size of the opposition. It's only when you participate that you reveal your strength, and therefore you make it more credible that maybe if the election environment had been freer and fair, maybe the opposition would have won. And so the gains, I think, are there more so when you participate. And here, I think some lessons can be learned from Venezuela's experience in the last couple of months, where the leading opposition candidate was disqualified, but she then endorsed a candidate with much less name recognition and channeled her energies into the election nonetheless. And there, they were also quite smart at showing the world that rigging did occur. They had the exit polls afterwards, they had the vote tallies afterwards that the opposition had collected, and were able to convince the world that yes, Maduro actually rigged these elections. And that, I think, is the more effective strategy for delegitimizing an election, is to force the regime to rig it. If the opposition boycotts, Kais Saied is going to win no matter what, rigging or not. In my mind, the opposition's better strategy is to participate, force the regime to rig it, and then publicize the rigging. That would delegitimize the election more so, and might then trigger a return to democracy.
Thank you. Radwan.
Thank you, Khaled and the National Interest Foundation for organizing this event and for inviting us. Of course, I am Tunisian American, so I'm very closely following the elections in Tunisia and the events in Tunisia. And I think that this is a huge opportunity to gain our democracy back, and a huge opportunity to reclaim, the gains of the revolution. Over the last 5 years, it's been terrible, politically, but also economically. The situation in Tunisia is really alarming. I think that these elections, that Kais Saied is making a mockery of these elections, that these are already rigged, to be honest, in many ways. And I'll list a few of them so that you know the extent of the rigging. Well, first of all, at least 40 of the top politicians and political leaders and leaders of political parties are in jail and have been in jail for between 1 year and 2 years. So all the major political parties, their leaders have been in jail on fake charges, and they're all conspiracy against the state. In addition to that, the opposition leaders, even those who are outside the jail, are not allowed to speak on public TV or public radio since July 25. This was a decision made by Kais Saied that they're not allowed to speak. While Kais Saied is speaking literally every day on public radio and public TV, the opposition is not allowed to speak on public radio or public TV. The EZ, as the ambassador mentioned, which the first I stands for independent, instance for the electoral process, is of course no longer independent. After the coup of July 25, the first thing that Kais Saied did is dismantled the EZ, the previous EZ, which was elected by parliament. Each member of the EZ had to be elected with over 3/4 of the members of the parliament, so it's almost unanimous vote. So it used to take 1 year and sometimes 2 years just to approve and vote for the members of the EZ. Well, all of those, that EZ was dismantled, as many other institutions, and he appointed the new EZ. He handpicked and appointed He wrote by hand a new law for the EZ that the EZ has to follow. But basically, he appoints them and he can fire them at any time. So basically, they work for him at his pleasure. In the past 4 or 5 months, when the elections came close, many people who have expressed a desire to participate, some of them are politically, they belong to political parties, some of them are independents, said, yeah, I want to run. And they started kind of running, in June or July and announcing that they're running. Well, almost all of them now are either in jail or in exile. They've been arrested, they've been charged, I can give you at least 20 names of people who said, we want to run in the last 4 or 5 months. Now they are either in jail or in exile, which means they fled the country. Out of the 17 candidates who managed to file their application, and the application was really big, it included 10,000, minimum 10,000 endorsements by citizens. Out of the 17 candidates, the EZ rejected 14 and accepted only 3. The 4 and very, the reasons for rejecting them were really stupid and funny because, well, you had to submit a form called Bulletin Numéro 3, B3, from the Ministry of Interior that shows that you had no criminal record and things like that. Well, the Ministry of Interior simply refused to give the form to them, so they couldn't supply it. So their application was rejected only based on that. So now we have only 3 candidates, Kais Said himself, another a guy called Maghzawi, who was a big supporter of Kais Said and of the coup and of Bashar al-Assad and Sisi and so on. So this is the number 2 candidate. And then we have a number 3 candidate, a newcomer, Ayashi Zamal, who is not really known in Tunisia. He was not very well known. He was a member of the parliament before the coup, but was not very well known. And so right now, it's like he's the only choice. He's the only option that Tunisians have if they want to vote. It's only one candidate. I think that Kais Said allowed him because he didn't think that he can get enough votes or that he represented a threat to Said. As the ambassador mentioned, the administrative court ruled that at least 3 of the candidates, the 14 who were rejected, should be reinstated as candidates. And the law is very clear on this. If the candidates don't agree with what decision of the EC, they go to the administrative court, and the administrative court decision is final. That's the highest court that regards the election and the electoral process. So the EZ completely dismissed the decision of the administrative court and said, no, we're not going to reinstate them, the 3 candidates. So they couldn't even handle 6 candidates. They wanted to limit it to only 3 because the other 3 candidates were more known and more, they had, more support and so on. Another thing that just happened, I think 3 days ago, the EZ made a unilateral decision also that the ceiling for spending on campaigns, which in Tunisia lasts only 3 weeks, they started only like 2 or 3 days ago or 5 days ago. There is a ceiling of $50,000 for the whole campaign, that the candidate cannot spend more than $50,000 for the whole campaign. And if you've been involved in campaigns, you know that they cost a lot more than that. If you do one big event, it could cost you $50,000. If you print, documents and things like that, could easily eat up more than half of your budget. So another restriction on the 2 candidates, while the president, of course, he's the president. He's on TV all the time. He can use the means of the state to go anywhere he wants, to attend meetings. There's really no limit on how much he can spend or how much he's spending. Lastly, one of the other things that are terrible is the NGOs that used to monitor the elections have not been allowed, at least so far, to monitor these elections. So this, as the ambassador mentioned, this is a big deal in Tunisia because typically the NGOs are able to to train and send out thousands of monitors and observers. Tunisia has about 15,000 boxes, ballot boxes throughout the country. And usually we have at least 20,000 monitors and observers from the NGO community to monitor all these boxes. And then before the box moves from the room where it is, they count the ballot box, they empty the ballot box, they count all the votes, and they all sign together the results of the elections, of the counting of that box, and they all take a copy of that report with them. And so that's how we can know that there has not been rigging. Well, this time apparently we're not going to have those NGOs looking after the integrity of the electoral process. So these are the conditions for the elections which are in stark contrast to what we had between 2011 until 2021, major setbacks. And now the opposition is really having a tough time to decide whether, not just the opposition, the people in general, whether they should participate or not. It's a very heated debate. If we participate, basically we're only legitimizing the elections because we know they're going to be rigged and he's going to announce whatever he wants because there are not even enough observers to monitor, so he can announce anything he wants. The EZ is not independent anymore, so they can do whatever they want. So a lot of people are saying, no, we should sit it out and not participate, including Shabbi, Najib Shabbi, Marzouqi, Hama Hammami, many of the political leaders have already said, we should not participate, we should boycott. However, there is now a push against that to say, no, we should participate, even though we know that these elections are probably rigged and probably will be rigged. The only way we can get back these elections in our country is by going in high volume, by everybody going and voting. We only have one candidate that we can vote for. It's not Qais Said. So obviously we're asking people to vote against Qais Said. The second candidate is basically a carbon copy of Qais Said. Maghzawi is not very far from the thinking of Qais Said or a big supporter of Qais Said. So we really only have one candidate. And we are saying, we should not boycott because we tried boycotts in the last 3 years. Elections that have, for the parliament, the current parliament, less than 11% participation. And Qais Said said, oh, it doesn't matter, the participation rate doesn't really matter. That's the people voted and, we're going to respect the decision of the people. So if we boycott again, we're going to have maybe 11%, maybe 15%, but only the supporters of Qais Said are going to vote, and therefore he's going to win, of course, if we boycott. But the better chance is to say, no, we're not going to boycott. We're going to go and vote, and we're going to overwhelm the system. That's the idea. We're going to vote in large numbers so that we know his popularity is way down. It's between 10 and 15%. So if we can get the participation rate to 35% or 40%, we know that we can get more than double the number of votes that he can get. And then the EZ will have to do a huge rigging, huge, large volume rigging. We're not only talking about few thousands votes, we're talking about millions, possibly 1 or 2 million votes. It's not easy to rig 1 million or 2 million votes, especially if the army does, as Sharan suggested, and we all pray that they do that, protect the integrity of the counting of the ballot box itself to make sure that there is not any major rigging. So these are very, very challenging times. I think this is, in my opinion, this is our last opportunity, not only to save democracy in Tunisia, but really to save Tunisia itself. Because this guy is literally destroying the country, literally destroying the state, destroying the economy. The businesses are fleeing. The economy, the whole country is in shambles. And I think this is our last opportunity to really say enough is enough. As you probably heard last week, there was a big demonstration in downtown with that slogan, enough is enough, and irhal, go away. So people are starting to demonstrate and be really fed up. Even those who supported him in the beginning, this is very important. Even people who supported him in the beginning, that support has evaporated because he has not achieved anything. So I think this is critical. These elections are critical for Tunisia, not only Tunisian democracy, but Tunisia as a country. We hope that the United States and the EU will do the right thing, which is really to pay attention, first of all, to these elections. We know they are busy with other problems, elsewhere, bigger problems probably. But I think these elections will be historic for Tunisia and maybe for the region. And I think that the Tunisian people are going to fight back. If there is major rigging, it will have to be obvious rigging. It will not be easy to hide this rigging, unlike Egypt or Algeria or other countries where it's easy to hide. Yes. So I have high hopes that that the elections will save Tunisia. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 20 minutes for questions and answers. So if you have a question, raise your hand and please identify yourself and your affiliation and try to be short so we give opportunity for more people to ask. Go ahead.
Thanks. I'm Sabina Henneberg from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thanks for all your remarks. My question for Ambassador Gray is, I agree that the international community in the West probably won't have much of a reaction to a very undemocratic election. I guess what do you think a reaction would bring? What would it try to achieve, given that sometimes sort of condemnation from the West seems to give Kais Saied more fuel, or at least it has, not totally consistently in the past 2 years, but to a certain extent. And my question for Sharan is just based on your research about that, I think I understood, seems to suggest that a more effective strategy for the opposition would be to participate. Does that hold under the conditions that describe the opposition in Tunisia today of not being very unified and not being very credible?
Thank you.
Thanks for your question. I think you've kind of identified what the problem is, or what the potential downside is of U.S. and or European condemnation of the election, which is that it just allows him to play the nationalist card or the populist card, however you want to phrase it, which he's done so frequently and a certain amount of success. But there's also a question of how that form of disapproval, if you will, would take, because if Sharan is right and the military does count the votes and they show that he won, then what is the condemnation? The vote count or the whole process running up to it? Sharan's analysis is convincing to me. So, I mean, I think what we'll see is probably a Kais Saied victory in an election that was completely flawed because of lack of outside observation, lack of, circumscribing the number of people who could run and the degree to which the press freedom was infringed. And I defer to everyone in this room. I sure haven't seen very many statements from the podium at the State Department or the European equivalent indicating any displeasure with the way the elections have going. I think it's a different situation from what I witnessed when I got to Tunisia, where Ben Ali was so hypersensitive about criticism that not just the not just potential criticism about the elections, but the absence of a congratulatory message from President Obama was such a big deal for the palace that they pulled a rather hapless ambassador, because you have to blame someone, and it must have been his fault.
Just on that note, I think congratulations is probably the most likely US response, given that that's what we just saw in Algeria, neighboring Algeria, a tweet congratulating Tebboune on his election. But yes, even the lack of a congratulations, if not a condemnation of the environment leading up to the elections, would I think be meaningful in terms of a US reaction. Sabina, to your second question about opposition unity, that's essential. In deciding boycott or participate, if they're divided and some boycott and some participate, you've undercut the effectiveness of either strategy. You must coordinate on one or the other. And while, yes, the opposition had been divided in the last couple of years, I think it was notable that the many disqualified candidates that were rejected in the last couple of months did put out a joint statement where they did overcome some of those divisions. You had Islamist, secularist, old regime, revolutionary, did put out a joint statement where they highlighted the flaws so far in the process and the restriction on the environment so far. And so if those figures, those with name recognition compared to those who made it to the ballot in the end, if those disqualified candidates coordinate and help the opposition, then help lead the opposition in some way in choosing which strategy, I think that could channel what is otherwise a divided opposition. And it could be for Ayashi Zamal, the kind of lone candidate who kind of represents the opposition relative to.
Oh, by the way, he's in jail also.
But because he is already being harassed, imprisoned, it is possible he might even be removed from the ballot. The case against him is having falsified these sponsorships. And so if he is removed, there still is an opportunity there to coordinate on spoiling the ballot, right? You would still then get a number of how many votes there are in the opposition if you coordinate still in some type of participation, spoiling the ballot, writing freedom on the ballot, some creative technique that'll still give a measure of how popular the opposition is.
Thank you. We have 3 questions online, so we'll take them, then we'll come back to you. Do you have the questions?
Yes, we have 3 participants in the webinar. Mohammed Ali Aziz, then Rebecca Wadnes and Muaz Zemni. Go ahead, Mohammed Ali.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Actually, I'm Mohammed Ali, former advisor to the State in Tunisia, and now I'm a asylum seeker in the US. So my question, perhaps, I do agree with participating to these elections because only I am for impacting positively. Because I think we tried boycotting the elections, but it impacts the situation negatively. So my question is, well, if we will participate, the opposition should provide a strategy. So my question is there any strategy to proceed, especially the elections are 20 days before the elections? So this is my question. Secondly, what will be our strategy as the opposition after getting pesticide elected? Thank you so much.
Mr. Ansel, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that the problem is the opposition is not united, and therefore it's very hard to have a united strategy. This is the main problem that we still have. They are closer to talking to each other, as Sharan mentioned, but I don't think that they are united or that they have a strategy, a united strategy. And I think overall, we only have 17 days, not even 20 days left. So overall, I don't think that they're going to be united on the day of the elections. I think we're going to see some still insisting on boycotting the elections and some going forward with participating, and this is going to weaken, both strategies, unfortunately. But I think now more and more people, this is what I've been sensing from talking to people, more and more people are coming to the conviction that participation is not guaranteed that it will be successful, but it still has a better chance of having an impact than boycotting, because we boycotted for 3 years. Said will win even with 10% participation rate. He doesn't care about the participation rate. He will say, hey, I won. And so we know that boycotting will simply is a gift, to Qais Said, and therefore, I think more and more people are coming to the conclusion that we need to participate in the hope, there is no guarantees, in the hope that it will make a difference and that Ayashi Zamal can actually win the election, or we can force the EZ and Qais Said to do very large scale rigging. Like I said, it will be in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps in the millions of votes that they need to rig in order for him to win. And I think that cannot be hidden. I think that will be obvious to Tunisians and to the international community.
Thank you. Aziz?
Yeah.
We'll come back.
Okay.
Yeah, Aziz Fahmi from Kuwaiti Radio. Sharan, you think that the participation of the army will be very decisive in making sure there is no rigging. But the real rigging happened in the process, even before casting the vote. So by definition, the army solution is very limited. And, in light of what Mr. Masmoudi explained, that how the process was rigged, what would be the efficiency of the army in this case?
Yeah, I do not view it as a solution to the issue. My point is just that the environment thus far has been unfree and unfair, just like it had been for the constitutional referendum and the parliamentary elections. But the counting of the votes on the day of has tended to be clean thus far. And that, I think, means that if the opposition participates, it's more likely than not that they will be counted freely. And if not, for the first time, we would see some conflict, in theory, between a military that's trying to preserve a clean vote versus an EZ that might try to rig the vote. But if you boycott, there's none of that, because then there's no need even to rig the election. So that's how I'm viewing how the opposition should be strategizing or could be strategizing based on what the military has done in the last elections.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take another participant from the webinar, Rebecca Wadness. Go ahead, please. Rebecca, you are
Hi
muted.
there. Sorry, no question from me. Apologies for that.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure. Mu'azz Zemini.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Radwan. Thank you, all the panelists. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. My question is to Ambassador Gray. Your Excellency, you witnessed the event in Tunisia. Now, what makes a difference at this time? Why the U.S. official position is really to sit back or throw democracy in Tunisia under the bus, or to turn blind eye on this dictatorship? Is it because Said is acting as the guardian of the sub-Saharan Africa and military cooperation is going well with the U.S.? And the same vein, Europe is also turning a blind eye on the military coup of Said, because 34 illegal migrants were, for that day, incarcerated thanks to Said acting as the guardian. So this policy of greedy, because we have bigger fish to fry, was choosing more leadership, ethical leadership, and we can count on the people of Tunisia. They're here, they're in jail, and we can count on the military because they're getting their, promotions every day. So can we count at least on the U.S. to withstand these values and
Thank you.
ethics and
Thank you.
Thank you.
diplomacy? Thank you.
Thank you, Muaz.
Would like to answer.
Sure. So thank you for your question. I think you've raised an important point. I don't think that the U.S. government's reluctance to criticize the Said power grab or to take any significant actions is due to concerns about migration across the Mediterranean. I think that's very much a factor for European countries, but it was a factor for European countries in 2011 as well. I think that for the United States, there are three factors that might explain the lack of willingness to criticize Said. One is there's no real champion anymore for Tunisia inside the U.S. government, not the U.S. government so much as the U.S. legislative branch. If you'll recall, Senator John McCain in particular was a very early and very vocal supporter of the transition in Tunisia. He came to Tunisia several times. He generated support on the Hill for Tunisia. I'm not saying that Tunisia there aren't people, elected officials on Capitol Hill who aren't concerned and don't support Tunisian democracy, but I don't think any of them are as seized with the issue as much as Senator McCain was. I think that's one reason. I think a second reason is, as I mentioned before, simply a lack of bandwidth in the U.S. foreign policy or national security decision-making process. There's just there are too many crises going on, and I think the third is, frankly, a lack of strategic foresight. I think they're very important reasons that the United States should continue to support Tunisia, but I don't think that's a very widespread feeling inside the U.S. government at this time. And so I think those are the three reasons that explain the difference between what the U.S. position was, say, for most of the 2010s and what the U.S. position is now.
Thank you. We'll take two more questions here and one more from here, and
Okay.
we'll end because we have only 10 minutes. No, I have a question.
Yes. To the ambassador's last point,
Your name, please, and organization.
Yes, Ayman Abdurrahman, I'm Tunisian. I work in international development. My question is to your last point. What should the U.S. Official stance be in the event where there is massive events of fraud occurring around the elections? The third candidate or the first candidate just has been sentenced like an hour ago, so he's probably going to be removed from the ballot, and that would probably leave Kaysai in just a race with Mazawi. So if our suspicions become true and massive events of fraud do happen on October 6th, how should the official stand? Should there be also a congratulations or an indirect tweet about the events of the elections, or should there be different?
No, I mean, I think that the U.S. government should definitely make clear its disappointment that there has been such a circumscribed election, and using a rather diplomatic term. By all means, I mean, just as in 2009, I advocated against sending a congratulatory message. If I were in the U.S. government, I would advocate against that. But I think the sad point is that we're talking about words rather than anything more substantial. The U.S. just doesn't have that much leverage over Qais Said. The assistance levels have gone down very significantly, and that doesn't seem to make a difference to him.
Thank you. Want to take notes?
So,
Any questions on this side? Okay, we'll take these two together.
we have William Lawrence who has raised his hand. Professor Lawrence, are you there? Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the panel. I missed Gordon Gray's opening remarks, but I've been following Sharan and appreciate the panel. I'm skeptical that Tunisians can be convinced. I don't disagree with the strategy articulated of overwhelming the system of voting against Qais Said, but I've been in Tunisia many times the last couple of years, was recently there. I don't see Tunisians voting for anybody. I don't see them as lining up to vote for an oppositional candidate who they don't trust either. I don't see the experience of voting against someone and voting somebody else in, which it was what got Qais Said to power, as working. I really don't see people that enthusiastic. My question is about economics, and it was in the chat. Why aren't more Tunisians protesting about the economy? Is there an explosion coming next time there's a triggering mechanism? Or has Qais Said been able to buy a certain amount of social peace with the Algerian, Saudi, and European migration money, flowing in just enough to, keep government salaries paid and do a modicum of social relief? Is there some social peace, or are things about to go economically? Because I think what the most likely set of events that would force Qais Said out with popular support would be economic more than political.
I'm going to piggyback on that question from Islam Hamza, who is a lawyer in Tunisia, a human rights lawyer. And the question to Sharan, as far as you know Tunisia's politics, do you think that the candidate Ayashi Zamed has any chance to win the elections?
Okay. So first on the economy, yes. By every metric, it seemed worse under post-Qais Said's takeover than before. You are right that the little bit of support from Algeria, Saudi Arabia, and Italy has kept it afloat, but the economic grievances are certainly there. The reason I think you haven't seen it bubble over into frustration with Qais Said in particular is because he has been quite good at creating diversions in using populist rhetoric that the cause of the problem is instead the businessmen or the sub-Saharan African migrants or even the US. He's able to deflect blame. And that, I think, explains why, despite the economic grievances, you haven't seen that explosion yet. In terms of Ayashi Zamal, look, he has little name recognition, which is both good and bad. That means Tunisians don't yet associate him as someone corrupt or from the old regime, but it also means he has little name recognition that could mobilize Tunisians. And so much depends on what the established opposition parties with name recognition do in this election. If they unite behind him, he may have a chance. If not, I don't see it happening. But if he is even removed from the ballot, I still think there is a way to demonstrate your strength by spoiling ballots in some coordinated fashion that still gives us a measure of how popular the opposition is. Because ultimately, that's the question of the day. Not, are these elections free and fair? We know they're not. But if they were to be free and fair, would Qais Said still win? To answer that, we need to know the opposition strength.
Thank you. Any comments?
No.
Your last question.
Yes, Fuad Kawthar Ali. I'm here against MBS and his regime, actually. I'll be hosting a live show with the former Tunisian president, Monsur Marzouki, this Friday. It's going to be in Arabic. And from this respected panel, what message could I discuss with him? I mean, figure with his caliber, will he have an impact on this by any means? So I may address that with him. I understand he's not attending this panel or this event.
In my opinion, please convince him to change his opinion, because right now he's calling for a boycott. Marzuki is calling for a boycott of the elections, and as we said, we've tried boycotts before, and basically it's like giving a blank check, to Qais Said, because we know that the participation rate is going to be low, but he's going to win, and he doesn't care about the participation rate. So if he can, Marzuki can help us by calling on people to participate and vote against Qais Said, he can make a big difference. I mean, Marzuki is a former president and he is well respected in Tunisia. If he calls for, participation, I think he can make a difference.
Okay, thank you, everybody, and have a good day.